Avoidant individuals are drawn to freedom like it's oxygen. Independence isn't just a preference, it's their identity. They take pride in being self-reliant and not depending on anyone to feel complete. To them, emotional autonomy is safety. And anyone who threatens that safety by being too dependent, too emotionally intense, or too available triggers their deepest instinct to escape. It's not that they dislike closeness. They crave it quietly. But when closeness starts to feel like obligation, they panic. They fear being responsible for someone's happiness. They fear becoming needed more than they can give. So, the more someone chases, the further they retreat. Because in their world, love that demands feels like a trap. But everything changes when they meet someone who doesn't need them. Someone who is self-contained, balanced, and emotionally grounded. This kind of person doesn't wait for calls, doesn't beg for attention, doesn't base their worth on the avoidance availability. They live in their own rhythm. They have purpose, peace, and direction that don't depend on the relationship. And that's when the dynamic flips. The avoidant, used to being the one in control, suddenly feels off balance. For the first time, they meet someone who mirrors, or even surpasses, their independence. Someone who doesn't crumble under distance, who doesn't chase after silence, who simply goes on living fully. That self-sufficiency is magnetic. It unsettles and fascinates them. They start thinking about this person not because of emotional drama, but because of emotional equilibrium. Because finally, here's someone who feels as free as they do, maybe freer. And that makes them curious, even captivated. Now, they're the one who checks their phone more often. They're the one replaying conversations, wondering if they were seen, valued, or missed. The hunter becomes the hunted, not because they lost control, but because they met someone who never needed it in the first place. If you want to better understand how to deal with avoidance, then subscribe to the channel to know everything. Avoidants don't fall in love with neediness, they fall in love with balance. With energy that doesn't pull on them, but stands beside them. You see, for someone with avoidant tendencies, love has always been tangled with loss of control. When someone depends too much, when emotions feel too heavy, it triggers something old inside them. The memory of being needed in ways they couldn't meet, or being consumed by expectations they never agreed to carry. So, when they sense emotional dependence, they equate it with danger. They don't see warmth, they see a closing door. And that's when they run. But everything changes when the dynamic reverses. When the person they're with radiates calm self-assurance. When they don't chase, don't beg, don't cling. The avoidant feels something they're not used to. Intrigue. Because independence speaks the same language they do, but fluently. This kind of partner doesn't guilt them into connection. They inspire it. They don't say, "I need you." They say, "I'm fine without you, but I enjoy you." That single phrase, even if unspoken, shifts everything. Suddenly, love stops feeling like a burden and starts feeling like a choice. To an avoidant, that's intoxicating. Because now, the emotional energy they usually spend protecting themselves is redirected into curiosity, pursuit, even admiration. They start to see that independence not as detachment, but as confidence. And that confidence feels safe. It reminds them that closeness doesn't have to cost them their autonomy. So they begin to chase. Quietly, subtly, almost unwillingly. They start initiating more contact, checking in, doing small things to re-enter the orbit of someone who doesn't revolve around them. Because that kind of self-contained energy pulls them in like gravity, steady, silent, and undeniable. The irony is that what they feared, emotional freedom, becomes the very thing that makes them fall in love. Because when you don't need an avoidant, you show them something they've never seen before. That love doesn't have to trap them. It can meet them where they are, and still make them want to come closer. For most of their lives, avoidants have been the ones in control. They decide the pace, the depth, the distance. They pull back when things feel too close, knowing the other person will move forward to close the gap. That's their safety pattern, predictable, secure, and quietly powerful. They keep love on their terms. But when they meet someone whose emotional energy is steady, self-contained, and genuinely fulfilled without them, that control begins to dissolve. This person doesn't chase after silence. They don't question every withdrawal. They don't try to fix what isn't broken. Instead, they mirror the avoidance distance with peace, not punishment. That peace unsettles the avoidant because it's not indifference. It's strength. And that strength turns the dynamic upside down. For the first time, the avoidant finds themselves wondering, why aren't they reacting? Why aren't they trying harder? The silence that used to comfort them now makes them uneasy. The emotional control they used to take pride in starts to slip. Suddenly, they're the one analyzing messages, replaying conversations, searching for signs of connection. They begin to crave the very presence they once took for granted. This isn't manipulation, it's magnetism. The self-sufficient partner has become the center of gravity in the relationship, not by force, but by emotional stability. It's the paradox that fascinates the avoidant. The person who doesn't need them becomes the one they want most. That balance of care and detachment is irresistible because it speaks to both sides of their inner conflict, the desire for closeness and the need for freedom. When someone can embody both, the avoidant feels something new, safety within attraction. And so they pursue, quietly, cautiously, but genuinely. They check in more. They initiate connection. They start to invest, not because they've lost control, but because they've found something rarer than dependence, someone who mirrors their strength without mirroring their fear. That's when the story begins to change. The avoidant, who has spent a lifetime running from emotional gravity, starts running toward it, drawn to the kind of love that doesn't ask them to surrender their independence, only to share it. What truly draws an avoidant in isn't your affection, it's your reflection. They fall for the version of themselves they see in your emotional independence. Avoidants value freedom above all else. To them, it's not just a lifestyle. It's a boundary between safety and suffocation. They spend years perfecting the art of self-sufficiency, learning to meet their own needs so they never have to depend on anyone who might let them down. But when they meet someone who embodies that same independence, someone who doesn't just survive alone, but thrives, something inside them stirs. They see in that person a mirror of who they aspire to be at their best, strong, composed, and emotionally unshaken. But they also sense something deeper, peace. The kind of peace they've never fully found in isolation. Because true independence isn't coldness or withdrawal, it's balance. It's knowing you can stand alone and still stay open to love. That balance fascinates the avoidant because it feels familiar, yet foreign. They recognize the independence, but not the calm. They recognize the strength, but not the ease. And so, curiosity takes over. They begin to lean in, not out of need, but out of desire to understand. The mirror effect begins to take hold. They see their reflection in your composure, but also what they lack, emotional safety without control. They start to feel drawn to you not for validation, but for resonance. You become living proof that closeness doesn't have to equal loss. This is when the avoidance pursuit begins to feel different. It's not just attraction, it's admiration. They don't chase because they're afraid to lose you. They chase because they respect you. Your detachment isn't rejection. It's self-respect, and that awakens something dormant in them, a longing for the same wholeness. It's the paradox of emotional power. When you stop trying to win an avoidant, you show them what real connection looks like. You stop being part of their pattern and start becoming their mirror, the one that quietly reflects who they could be if they stopped running. Avoidants are drawn not to chaos, but to calm that has weight, emotional gravity, the kind of energy that doesn't chase, but pulls. For someone who's spent years mastering detachment, emotional gravity is disarming. It's subtle yet powerful. It doesn't overwhelm, it anchors. It doesn't demand attention, it commands it through steadiness. When an avoidant meets a partner who carries this kind of grounded self-sufficiency, something inside them shifts. The relationship stops being about power and becomes about presence. This partner doesn't try to prove their worth. They don't overextend to earn affection or security. They stand still, emotionally, energetically, and that stillness becomes magnetic. It creates a field around them that the avoidant can't quite escape. Because what they feel isn't pressure, it's stability. And for someone who's spent a lifetime equating love with emotional chaos, that's irresistible. The avoidant begins to orbit around this balance. They test it quietly. They pull back to see if the connection fades. It doesn't. They lean in and see if the person loses themselves in the closeness. They don't. Every move the avoidant makes to regain emotional control only confirms that they're dealing with someone entirely different. Someone who's not afraid of losing them, because they were never chasing them in the first place. That realization changes everything. The avoidant, for perhaps the first time, feels something safe enough to approach and strong enough to withstand them. The partner's independence doesn't threaten their freedom, it enhances it. And this balance of mutual autonomy and gentle connection is where attraction deepens into love. This is emotional gravity. Two people with their own centers of strength, pulling toward each other not out of need, but resonance. The avoidant isn't used to that kind of pull. It feels like surrender, but without fear. Like belonging, but without loss. And in that quiet, steady field of self-assured energy, they finally feel something they've been running from their entire lives. Connection that doesn't cost them their independence. Something remarkable happens when the avoidant feels that emotional gravity. The balance of power reverses. The one who once withdrew begins to pursue. At first, it's subtle. They start replying faster. They linger longer in conversation. They initiate plans instead of dodging them. They start showing up in small but consistent ways. It's not about playing games. It's about curiosity turning into pursuit. Because this time, they're the one who feels a quiet urgency to be seen, to be chosen. Why? Because for once, the avoidant isn't the center of emotional attention, and that unsettles them. The person in front of them doesn't orbit around their moods, their silences, or their availability. Instead, they move through life with purpose, grounded and self-directed. And that kind of energy challenges everything the avoidant believes about love. They're used to being desired for their distance, admired for their mystery. But now, they're the one drawn to someone who holds that same mystery in a different form. Not the kind born of fear, but of strength. This partner's emotional self-sufficiency radiates something powerful. I don't chase love. I attract it. The avoidant begins to notice the difference between independence that isolates and independence that invites. One builds walls. The other builds magnetism. And that distinction is what pulls them in deeper. Soon, they start to crave connection, not control. They want to understand how this person stays so calm, so complete, even in the face of uncertainty. It's a quiet obsession, the kind that doesn't come from insecurity, but from reverence. The avoidant feels both admiration and longing, and for the first time, those two emotions coexist instead of colliding. They realize that they can't win this person by withdrawing. Distance doesn't draw this partner closer. It only highlights how fulfilled they already are. And that's when the avoidant does something they rarely do. They move toward vulnerability. They start opening small doors, asking deeper questions, sharing fragments of their past, making gentle bids for emotional closeness. It's cautious, hesitant, but real, because they don't want to lose what they finally recognize. Love that doesn't cage them, but calls them forward. When the avoidant begins to chase, something new and frightening awakens in them, the fear of losing safety. You see, avoidance has never really been about rejecting love. It's about preserving control. Their distance is a shield, a way to manage the unpredictable world of emotions. For years, that strategy worked. Keep people at arm's length, and you never have to fear rejection. never have to face the shame of needing someone, never have to risk being abandoned again. But now, this person, calm, independent, whole, begins to matter. They represent a kind of safety that doesn't rely on control, a love that allows space. And that's terrifying, because suddenly, the avoidant feels something they've spent a lifetime avoiding: dependence without losing autonomy, emotional connection without collapse. That duality overwhelms them. Their usual instincts start to fight the very feelings that make them feel alive. They may pull back again, not because they've lost interest, but because they've never learned how to hold intimacy that feels both real and free. The part of them that longs for closeness collides with the part that equates closeness with danger. And yet, even in withdrawal, something feels different this time. They can't detach completely. The thought of losing this self-sufficient, centered partner gnaws at them. Because now, this person isn't just another connection. They're proof that love can exist without pressure. That connection can be steady without dependency. The avoidant begins to notice things they've never paid attention to before: how peace feels better than power, how presence feels more comforting than control. They start to understand that what they thought was independence was really isolation, and that this person's emotional strength doesn't threaten them. It teaches them. So they return, quietly, trying to bridge the distance without naming it. They check in, offer small gestures, subtly test whether the connection is still alive. And when the partner meets that effort with warmth, but without surrendering their center, something softens in the avoidant's chest. For the first time, they see love not as a trap, but as a balance. Not something to escape from, but something to grow inside of. Because the one they feared losing control to has never tried to control them at all, only to show them what real freedom inside connection looks like. At this stage, the avoidant begins to feel something they rarely allow themselves to experience: respect. Not admiration for success or attraction to confidence, but emotional respect for the person who never tried to own them. They realize something profound. This partner could have demanded, could have begged for attention, could have used guilt or neediness to force closeness. But they never did. They simply stayed rooted in their own energy. They didn't try to prove their worth. They embodied it. And that self-possession commands quiet reverence. For an avoidant, this is disorienting. Their entire framework of love is built around control. Pull away, and the other person chases, proving attachment but also confirming their fears. But here, the script has flipped. The partner doesn't react to distance with desperation. They respond with dignity. They don't fight for emotional survival. They choose emotional integrity. That's when admiration deepens into respect, and respect becomes the bridge to love. Because love, for the avoidant, doesn't begin in passion, it begins in safety. They need to respect someone before they can trust them. And trust is the only language their heart truly understands. This realization humbles them. The independence they once used as a shield now looks small next to this person's self-mastery. They begin to see that true independence isn't about avoiding reliance. It's about knowing you can rely on yourself and still open your heart. So they start to soften. They begin sharing pieces of themselves, not out of obligation, but desire. They offer small admissions, like, "I missed you," or "I thought about you," in a tone that surprises even them. These words feel foreign, but right. Because this time, it's not about control. It's about connection freely chosen. And with every moment of openness, the respect grows. They feel safe enough to care, vulnerable enough to admit it, and steady enough to not feel threatened by it. That is emotional growth in its purest form, not the disappearance of fear, but the courage to act in spite of it. The partner, meanwhile, doesn't gloat or collapse into the affection they once hoped for. They remain balanced, appreciative but centered. That steadiness keeps the avoidant grounded. It tells them, this connection isn't about possession, it's about presence. And for the first time, the avoidant begins to see love not as surrender, but as mutual power. two whole people, meeting without losing themselves. Love only begins to feel real to an avoidant when it stops feeling dangerous. And that happens when they finally understand that vulnerability doesn't mean losing control, it means sharing it. Up until now, love has always been a battlefield for the avoidant, a constant negotiation between the heart that wants to connect and the mind that fears being consumed. But with this self-sufficient, grounded partner, something changes. The rules that once defined love, distance, silence, control, begin to dissolve. Because now, the avoidant feels seen without being trapped. Their independence is respected, not resented. Their quiet moments are accepted, not criticized. Their emotional pacing isn't rushed, it's mirrored. And slowly, that level of safety starts to rewire their idea of love. They begin to associate closeness not with pressure, but with peace. They start to notice how calm connection feels, how silence between two people doesn't have to be awkward, how vulnerability doesn't have to mean exposure. For the first time, their nervous system doesn't go into survival mode when someone gets close. This kind of love doesn't ask for surrender, it invites participation. It doesn't chase, it flows. It says, "You can have your space, and I'll still be here when you return." And that kind of freedom is what the avoidant's heart has been craving all along. Not escape, but equilibrium. The irony is that what once made them run, a partner's strength, stability, and emotional confidence, now becomes the very thing that keeps them close. Because this relationship doesn't feel like losing control, it feels like sharing power. It's mutual autonomy, not mutual dependency. The avoidant, who once believed that love meant the erosion of self, now learns that true love amplifies individuality. They can be close without merging, connected without being consumed. And that realization changes everything. They start to let affection come naturally, not as a strategy or performance, but as genuine expression. They initiate more. They speak more openly. They stop hiding behind emotional logic and start allowing emotional truth. The armor cracks, but not in pain, in release. For the first time, love feels like freedom. Not because it's distant, but because it's safe. The transformation of an avoidant doesn't happen with pressure, it happens with peace. When they finally meet someone who mirrors their strength without demanding their surrender, they discover the truth they've been avoiding their whole lives. Freedom and love were never opposites. They were always meant to coexist. In this space of emotional equilibrium, everything changes. The avoidant no longer needs to run to feel free, nor does their partner need to chase to feel wanted. Both stand as whole individuals, two complete worlds that choose to orbit each other, not collide. The energy that once fueled avoidance now fuels connection because it's no longer about survival. It's about choice. The avoidance starts doing what they once thought impossible, showing up consistently. Not because they feel obligated, but because they want to. They send the message first. They make plans. They express affection in subtle, genuine ways. It's not grand or dramatic, but it's real. Their love becomes quiet but steady, free from the old anxiety of losing control. And their partner, still calm, still grounded, doesn't gloat or take over the dynamic. They stay balanced. That's the secret. They never try to fix the avoidant, never try to own them. They simply hold the same emotional vibration that first drew the avoidant in, a vibration of peace, independence, and quiet confidence. This is the point where love stops being a power struggle and becomes a partnership. The avoidant learns that intimacy doesn't mean entrapment, it means expansion, that they can belong to someone without disappearing inside them. And that realization heals more than just their fear. It redefines what love means altogether. Because real love, the kind that lasts, isn't about constant reassurance. It's about two people standing firmly in who they are, complete, self-sufficient, yet deeply connected. It's about choice renewed every day. I don't need you to complete me. but I choose you because you inspire me. And that's how you reach an avoidant's heart, not by chasing it, but by standing in your own. Because when you embody the freedom they worship, you remind them that love was never the enemy. Fear was. And once fear fades, love rushes in, calm, clear, and unstoppable. If this message resonated with you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Comment your thoughts below, subscribe to the channel, and keep growing with us, where self-awareness meets real love.